All right, so we've got this review you shared about integrating Stripe payments with Microsoft Dynamics.
CRM?
Yeah, MSCRM, right? Using Azure.
Yeah.
And I think our goal today is to really kind of like break this down, pull out the really key insights, especially for someone who wants to like get up to speed quickly without getting lost in the weeds.
Absolutely. And I think what's really interesting here is even what seems like a simple connection between systems, especially when you're dealing with money and customer data, it gets complicated fast.
Right.
And I think this review does such a good job of being that experienced guide.
Yeah.
Kind of showing you the pitfalls and the traps to avoid.
Yeah. And the review does a good job of breaking this down into these 5 key steps.
Yeah.
First is setting up Stripe.
Yeah.
Second is implementing this MS CRM plugin.
Right.
Third, setting up Azure Service Bus, which is kind of like your
messaging system.
Their messaging system. Yeah, exactly.
Yeah.
Then implementing a webhook listener in Azure.
Yep.
And then finally processing those payment events back in CRM.
Yeah.
And the review for each of these steps points out like, okay, this is where someone new to this might struggle. This is where even someone experienced might trip up.
Right.
And here's some better ways to do it.
Exactly. And that's where those light bulb moments, I think, really come into play because you start to see, okay, these are the things that typically go wrong.
Right.
Let's make sure we sidestep those.
Okay, so let's just jump right into setting up Stripe.
Okay.
The first thing that the review points out is that Stripe has these separate test and live environments.
Yeah, that's super important.
And it's really easy to accidentally grab your live API keys when you're still developing and testing.
It's a big one.
Yeah.
And, if you accidentally start processing live payments when you're not ready, that can be a real mess.
Yeah.
So, that separation of test and live is crucial.
It's huge.
Yeah.
The guide said, use only test API keys initially.
Yeah, absolutely.
And really show how to toggle between those modes in the Stripe dashboard.
Exactly. And make it clear, this is your playground over here.
Right.
This is where the real game happens.
Yeah, exactly. So, don't go live until you're ready.
Exactly.
Okay, next up is Webhook Security.
Okay.
So the review points out that the original guide does mention setting up webhook endpoints and selecting these events like checkout.session.completed, payment intent.succeeded, and payment intent.failed.
Right. Those are your key signals from Stripe.
Yeah, and these are crucial for knowing, when a payment is successful.
Exactly. They're like little digital notifications telling your system what's going on with each payment.
So those are good.
Yeah.
But the review says the guide kind of glosses over the Webhook Secret.
Right, and this is a big one.
Yeah.
So that Webhook Secret is essentially how you verify that those webhooks are actually coming from Stripe and haven't been tampered with. So it's like a digital signature.
Got it.
Guaranteeing the authenticity of those messages.
Okay, so the review says that this placeholder in the Azure function code we see your Webhook Secret.
Yeah, you got to replace that.
Yeah, that's got to be replaced.
Absolutely, with your real secret from Stripe.
Yeah, with the real secret.
Yeah, no exceptions.
Okay. And then it also mentions that the endpoint for your Azure function must use HTTPS.
Yes, HTTPS is essential.
Okay. And that's for secure communication, right?
Right. That encrypts the data in transit, so no eavesdropping.
And the review even provides this table.
Oh, that's nice.
That explains what each of these key webhook events means.
Oh, that's really helpful.
So it's like, okay, checkout session completed.
Right. So that means someone's gone through checkout. They put in their payment details.
Okay.
Everything looks good on that end.
Got it. And then payment intent succeeded.
That means Stripe.
Yeah. Successfully processed the payment.
Okay. So money's good.
Money is good.
And then payment intent failed.
That's your signal that something went wrong?
Okay. So then we have to log that failure.
Right. Exactly.
Okay.
You need to handle that appropriately.
Okay. So the next thing, sticking with security.
Okay.
The review says the original guide didn't even have a security best practices section for Stripe.
Oh, that's a miss.
I know.
Big miss.
So I think for, anyone listening, security is key here.
Absolutely.
And the biggest no-no that the review highlights is hard-coding your API keys and webhook secrets.
Yeah. Right in your code.
Right in the code.
Yeah, that's like leaving your keys under the doormat.
It's a bad idea.
Yeah.
Bad idea. So the review really pushes for secure storage.
Yeah.
They mention environment variables, which are easier.
Yeah, they're a bit simpler to set up.
Okay.
But for production, they say Azure Key Vault.
Okay. And that's like the Fort Knox.
Yeah, Key Vault is like your digital Fort Knox.
Yep. For sensitive information.
And they even provide this table comparing the two.
That's helpful.
So environment variables are easier to use.
Right.
Keep your configurations separate from your code.
Yeah, good for development.
Good for development.
Yep.
But less secure for production.
Right.
And then Key Vault is super secure.
Yeah.
You can manage all your secrets in one place.
Right. You got central control.
Yeah, you can control access audit logs.
Exactly.
So it's definitely the way to go for production.
Yeah, for production, you want that high level of security.
Okay. And then beyond that, the review also recommends regularly rotating your API keys.
Oh, that's a good practice.
Yeah, it's like changing your password.
Yeah, exactly.
And then limiting access to those credentials.
Right.
Using the principle of least privilege.
Yeah.
So only give people access to what they need.
Exactly.
Need to know basis.
Yeah, exactly.
Good security hygiene.
All right, let's move on to the MS CRM plugin implementation.
Okay.
The first thing the review highlights is a potential compatibility issue.
With the .NET Framework version.
Oh, right. .NET Framework.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So the original blog post suggests using .NET 6 or later.
Okay.
For the CRM plugin.
Yeah.
However, Dynamics 365 often prefers .NET Framework 4.6.2.
So there's a discrepancy there.
Yeah, and this is because, Dynamics is built on an older version of .NET Framework.
Right.
And while plugins built with later versions might work,
right,
it's recommended to stick with the officially supported version.
Yeah, for maximum compatibility.
To avoid any issues.
Right.
During plugin registration or runtime.
Exactly. You want to make sure it just works.
Yeah. Okay. Next thing the review really emphasizes is the need for secure secret key management.
Okay.
Within CRM.
Right.
And they really criticize hard coding the Stripe secret key.
Yeah.
In the C# plugin code.
Right. And
they call it a huge vulnerability.
It is a big one.
And right.
Yeah.
Instead, they suggest using CRM's secure configuration.
Right.
During plugin registration.
Yeah, that's a good option.
Or storing the key.
Right.
In a secure CRM configuration entity.
Yeah. So you've got options there.
Yeah. And the guide should have provided at least one code example.
Yeah. Show people how to do it securely.
Yeah, exactly.
Right.
Okay. The review also suggests beefing up the error handling in the plugin code.
Okay. Error handling is always important.
Right. So it's not just about catching errors.
Yeah.
It's about making those errors useful.
Right.
So they recommend using eye-tracing service to log detailed error information.
So you can actually track down the problem.
Right.
Yeah.
And this can be found in the plugin trace log in Dynamics 365.
Okay.
And they also suggest throwing informative invalid plugin execution exception messages.
Right.
So that users can actually see what went wrong.
Yes. So it's not just a cryptic error message.
Right.
It actually tells you what happened.
Okay. Another point is the example code in the guide hard codes USD as the currency and card as the payment method.
Yeah, that's very limiting.
And they're like, this is not realistic.
Right. In the real world, you've got multiple currencies.
Right.
Different payment methods.
Yeah.
You got to be flexible.
So the guide should have shown how to get currency information from CRM dynamically.
Yeah.
And how to expand payment method types.
Right. To include other options.
Yeah, to be more flexible.
Right.
Okay. The review also points out how the code uses context, primary entity, and metadata to link the Stripe payment intent to the CRM record.
Yeah, that's your connection point.
Yeah. So they say the guide should be very clear about which CRM entity the plugin is for.
Right. Is it a custom payment entity?
Yeah. Is it a sales order?
A sales order. What is it?
But explain why this CRM payment metadata is so important.
Right, because that metadata lets you attach extra information to those Stripe objects.
Okay.
Which is crucial for linking the two systems.
Okay, so you've got to explain that.
Yeah.
Okay. And then finally, in the CRM plugin section, the review kind of digs into the whole plugin registration process.
Right, because that can be a bit of a black box.
Yeah, it can be a bit confusing.
Yeah.
So they emphasize the difference between synchronous and asynchronous plugins.
Okay, so immediate versus background.
Yeah, immediate versus background.
Yeah.
And they suggest that synchronous is probably best here.
Okay.
And then they walk through the steps in the plugin registration tool.
Okay, so you connect.
Yeah, you connect.
You register the assembly.
You register the assembly, that's your ADL.
Right.
You register a new step for when the plugin should execute.
Right, so on create of the record, on update.
Right.
What are your triggers?
They point out that you have to sign the plugin assembly.
Yeah, with a strong name key.
Yeah.
That's a requirement.
And then they even mention these concepts of plugin execution pipeline stages.
Okay.
Like pre-operation.
Yeah.
which is usually the best for creating payment intents.
Right.
And then the plugin execution context.
So whose credentials is it running under?
Right.
Yeah, that's all important.
So it's a lot of information.
It is a lot, yeah.
But it's good that they clarify that.
Absolutely.
Okay, let's move on to setting up Azure Service Bus.
Okay.
The review says that the guide could have been more specific about creating the Service Bus namespace and queue in the Azure portal.
Yeah, because if you're new to Azure, that can be a bit daunting.
They're talking about like guiding you through searching for Service Bus.
Yeah.
Naming the namespace.
Right, picking your region.
Choosing the region.
Your pricing tier.
The pricing tier, yeah.
Standard versus premium.
And then they also point out that the connection string is linked to these shared access policies.
Right. Which control permissions.
Yeah.
Who can listen, who can set, who can manage the queue.
So that's important to understand too.
Absolutely. Got to control access.
Okay. And then the review points out this really important logical flaw in the original blog post.
Yeah. What is it?
They said that the blog post told you to send events to the service bus before the Azure function was even created.
Oh, that's backwards.
Which is backwards.
Yeah. You got to have the listener in place before you start sending messages.
So the review says, okay, first Stripe webhooks.
Right.
Then Azure Service Bus.
Yeah.
Then the Azure function to receive the Stripe events.
Okay.
And then the logic to publish to the Service Bus queue.
Got it. Yeah. That order makes a lot more sense.
So that's a big fix.
It is a big fix.
Okay. Let's move on to the webhook listener in Azure.
All right.
The review recommends using the .NET isolated worker model for the Azure function.
Okay, so this is how the function runs.
Yeah, and they're saying this offers better compatibility and flexibility.
Right, it's a more modern approach.
Yeah, and the guide should have specified this.
Yeah, make it clear which model to use.
Yeah. And then, just like with the CRM plugin, hard-coding the Webhook Secret in the Azure function code is a no-no.
Right, got to keep those secrets safe.
So they say store it as an Azure function app setting.
Yeah, that's a good spot for it.
Okay, and they even provide the code example.
Oh, nice.
Environment. Get environment variable, Stripe Webhook Secret.
So you're not hard coding it. You're pulling it from a secure location.
Okay. Another thing is the example, Azure function code only handles payment intent succeeded events.
Oh, okay.
But remember, we're subscribed to 3 checkout.session.completed, payment intent succeeded, and payment intent .failed.
Got to handle all of them.
Yeah, so the function needs to handle all 3.
Yeah.
And they suggest including code to process checkout.session.completed.
Okay.
Because that might have more order details.
Right.
And payment intent failed to handle failed payments.
Exactly.
And update CRM accordingly.
Yeah, cover all your bases.
Okay. They also suggest that sending the entire payment intent object to the service bus might be a bit much.
Yeah, you might not need all that data.
So they suggest creating a data transfer object, a DTO.
Okay, a DTO, just the essential information?
Yeah, just the essential information from the payment intent and the checkout session.
Yeah, keep it lightweight.
Okay, and then network issues can happen.
Right.
So they recommend adding error handling and retry logic to the Azure function.
Always a good idea.
Yeah, and ideally exponential backoff.
Right, so you don't overload the system.
Exactly.
Yeah.
And then finally in this section, the review says the guide needs to explain how to get the URL.
Oh, right. The function URL.
Yeah, of the deployed Azure function from the Azure portal.
Because that's what you need to give to Stripe for the webhooks.
Yeah, and the guide should mention any necessary authorization like function keys.
Right, got to make sure it's secure.
And how to include those in the URL.
Exactly.
Okay, we're almost there.
Right.
Now we're on to processing the payment events in CRM.
Okay, final step.
So if we used a DTO in the previous step, the Azure function that's reading from the service bus should also use that same DTO.
Right. Consistency is key.
Yeah, not the full payment intent object. Okay.
Okay. Now, this is where the original blog post was really lacking, according to the review.
Okay.
They say it needs to provide detailed instructions and code examples for interacting with the MS CRM API.
Right. So how do you actually talk to CRM?
Yeah, from the Azure function.
Yeah.
So they break this down into a few areas. First, authentication.
Right.
How does your Azure function authenticate with CRM?
Okay.
They suggest using Azure AD application registration and an application user in Dynamics 365.
Right. So it has its own identity within Azure.
And they should provide code examples for obtaining an access token.
Yeah. Show people how to actually do it.
Okay. Then identifying the CRM record.
Okay.
So once the function gets a payment notification,
right,
how does it know which record in CRM to update?
Yeah.
So they point back to that CRM paymented metadata and say the guide should show how to query CRM using either the Web API or the .NET SDK.
Give them options to find the right record. Okay, and then updating the record.
Okay.
So the review says, okay, provide code examples for updating the CRM payment record with the relevant status.
Completed or failed.
And other details from the Stripe event using either the Web API, HTTP, BTCH they specify, or the .NET SDK.
So again, give them options.
And then error handling, of course. It's super important.
Absolutely got to have that.
When interacting with the CRM API. So try catch blocks, logging errors with iLogger.
All the best practices.
And then beyond just the code, the review says the guide should also explain how to handle each of those Stripe events. So checkout session completed, payment intent succeeded, payment intent failed.
Got to handle them all.
And how to update CRM in a way that makes sense for each one.
The actions might be different depending on the event.
Okay. And just like before, they recommend retry mechanisms with exponential backoff in the Azure function.
Makes sense.
That processes messages from the service bus to make sure CRM gets updated. Even if there are temporary issues.
Got to be resilient.
All right, so we've gone through all 5 steps. And the review actually says that the overview of the final system architecture was pretty good.
That's good.
In the original blog post.
So at least they got that right.
So that's a positive note. But when it comes to the next steps for deployment and testing, the review says the guide could have been much more detailed. They say it should have included specific testing scenarios with steps and expected outcomes.
Like a checklist to make sure everything's working.
And they provide some examples.
Oh, nice.
Like creating a payment record in CRM. And verifying the payment intent in Stripe. Simulating a successful payment in the Stripe dashboard. And verifying those checkout.session.completed and payment intent.succeeded webhook events in the Azure function logs.
Make sure those are firing.
Checking the service bus queue for the payment event message. Verifying that the Azure function processing the queue updates the CRM payment record to completed. Simulating a failed payment in Stripe. And verifying the payment intent. Failed event. And the failed status in CRM.
So test all the scenarios.
All the scenarios.
Positive and negative.
Exactly. Okay, so big takeaway is the guide needs more detailed testing instructions.
Absolutely.
Okay, so what does all this mean for someone listening? I think this deep dive into this Stripe and MS CRM integration review has highlighted some really important stuff.
Things that are easily overlooked.
Especially if you're new to this. We've talked about why you need those test environments. Why Webhook security is so crucial.
Absolutely.
Best practices for API key management and how to get Stripe, Azure, and Dynamics.
All talking to each other.
To talk to each other. Now, here's where it gets really interesting. Think about that whole data journey from CRM to Stripe to Azure and back to CRM.
It's a round trip.
What could go wrong? What bottlenecks could pop up if you have a huge volume of transactions?
That's where scalability and reliability become really critical.
And I think that's something for, anyone listening to think about.
Absolutely.
And maybe exploring Azure's monitoring and logging services could be a good next step.
Good idea. All right. That was a good one.
Thanks for coming on.
Thanks for having me.